So, have you ever been in a situation with a girl where everything seemed to be going perfect? There was great chemistry, fun conversation, she seemed really receptive overall, and then she just disappeared without a trace. Or maybe you've experienced the opposite, where a girl who was cold and distant suddenly turned warm on you, and then you were just left wondering, what happened exactly? These are the kind of scenarios that can really mess with your head and be confusing, and a lot of dating advice out there just scratches the surface. But in this video, I'm gonna go deeper and break down some of the truths about dating that most guys never hear, yet they're crucial for understanding why things don't always go as planned with women. Now, this first one is something that every guy needs to understand on a deeper level, and I say a deeper level because it can be hard to internalize this. It can be hard to internalize because it's difficult to override what your senses are telling you in the moment when you're talking to a girl. But you have to develop the skill to see past your own senses in a way, or your own perception of a woman's behavior. And one of the major reasons why you want to do this is because I see guys having their self-esteem negatively impacted when they judge things at a surface level too much. They will feel like a girl is interested in them and is showing them all these positive signs, but then later on they get ghosted, or the girl rejects them in conversation and it tears their whole mental state down and they feel like a failure. If that type of thing happens to you, a major issue there is also basing your self-esteem and confidence on external circumstances, and that has to be corrected, which takes time. But in the short term, you must learn to ignore a lot of a woman's outward state and how she appears, and instead judge her based on her actions. And this is why I actually don't like a lot of content about a woman's interest signals. Interest signals from a woman can be hazy and inconclusive sometimes. Both men and women will say things like, well, if a girl plays with her hair, she's clearly interested in you. Or if she asks you a question, she's definitely into you. And things like this can be part of the puzzle, but in isolation, they are far too unreliable, and she may just be making conversation to be friendly, or she's playing with her hair out of habit. It's not that these supposed interest signals won't be displayed by a woman who is into you, it's just that they can't be relied upon all on their own to signal that this woman is into you for sure and is a solid investment. And the core reason behind that is a lot of the time, a woman's internal state is largely disconnected from her outward state that you see. Her outward state is not a direct reflection of her inward state. And this is why a woman can seem to be having a good conversation with you, and then you text her later, and she ghosts you. Her outward state meant zero, and her internal state did not have high enough interest to continue the interaction with you, and things fell off. So trusting her outward signals like her smile and her supposed interest is unreliable. This is also why getting numbers means nothing versus landing actual dates. You want to pay more attention to action-based interest signals like, does she make herself available to you to meet up, or does she continue to invest into the conversation in the follow-up? These types of larger signals are more telling than trying to analyze all these little in-between details to try and decipher if she's into you or not. It's mostly a losing game that will have you overanalyzing and going in circles to try and decipher her interest level when it may not even be there in the first place. This can work in the reverse as well. Sometimes you'll question a girl's interest or think that she's not into you, and then all of a sudden she's following up with you for another date or is more receptive to escalation than you expected. Or maybe she even escalates on you. I've had that situation happen before where I felt like the interaction went okay, but nothing special, and then all of a sudden the girl makes a move on me and I was like, wait, what? Now, of course, if there's extremely obvious signals of disinterest, like a woman stonewalling you in conversation or trying to get out of the conversation, then you should be socially aware enough to understand that there's nothing there with her. But for those more typical interactions where you feel like a girl is into you or you aren't fully sure, it's a better idea to fall back and remind yourself to judge her based on her actions instead of her outward appearance, and it'll save you a lot of time and stress. Because a woman's outward state is not always an accurate representation of her inward state, so don't put too much stock into trying to read those signals either way. Now, moving on to this next one. This is one that can feel extremely counterintuitive for a lot of guys. And women can increase your confusion around this concept because of the common advice that they give or expressions of what they say they want. And before I expand on it more, I want you to think back and ask yourself if you've ever had a time where you either decided to go all out for a girl, or you thought to yourself, I'm really going to put on my A game here with this girl and show her an amazing time from top to bottom. We're going to go on an awesome date. I'm going to show up with the fresh haircut. I'm going to be charismatic and charming. I'm going to romance her, and I'm going to absolutely nail this with her. You've probably experienced some version of this to where you decided to increase your effort with a girl that you were attracted to, but then things didn't end up how you expected or wanted them to. Things flopped, and then you thought back to another time where you seemed to put in very little effort and the girl was all over you, or you attracted a girl that you weren't really into and it was hard to shake her. Most of us can relate to these examples in some way or another. And because of this, it is critical to understand that there is not a reliable correlation between effort and attraction. This is very counterintuitive because in society, we are typically conditioned to believe that the more effort we put into something, the better results that we will get. If we work harder, we will make more money. If we study more in school, we'll get better grades. If we practice more at the sport, we will have a better chance at winning a championship. It's a very logical line of thinking, but the game of attraction does not follow a logical sequential process like this. Things can get even more confusing when you listen to women say things like they want a man who puts in effort or tries, or they'll say the opposite and say that you should just sit back and wait for the right girl to come across your path. The reality is that just because you put in more effort does not mean that this girl will become more attracted, and in many cases it can work against you. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't put in any effort at all either. Attraction is a process that has a lot of illogical intangibles along the way sometimes. And as a man, you're dealing with the feminine thought process, which is inherently based more on emotion than logic, so it will naturally create confusion in your logical mind. So from there, the next thought you're left thinking is, well, how much effort should I actually put in then? What is too much and what is too little? Should I even try at all? And the correct and frustrating answer is that there is a happy middle ground. The problem is that many men treat dating and attraction like a bench press rather than a handstand. With a bench press, the harder you push against the bar, the better the result. But with a handstand, if you lean too far one way or another, you will fall over, and attraction is the same as a handstand. There is a baseline threshold of effort you have to put in to get anywhere. So think of actions like putting yourself out there to get exposure to women, taking care of your grooming, your physique, working on good conversational skills, etc. These are the baseline things that put you in the game and give you a strong stance and vantage point to operate from. But from there, there's a lot of intangibles that you won't be able to control, and because you cannot control them, more effort will not serve you well. And that's where you have to become more efficient with your time and screening process. At a certain point, she's either attracted to you or she isn't. And doing more is just going to spin your wheels in the mud and lead to frustration. This also leads to the classic scenario where the nice guy treats the girl like a princess, and then as soon as she leaves, she calls over the random dude in her phone that comes over and claps her cheeks every few weeks without any investment. And then the nice guy rages when he finds this out. In that scenario, there's multiple aspects that makes that other guy attractive, and I don't want to go off on a tangent in another direction. So the main idea I want you to take away from this is that if you find yourself having to try harder and harder, or you're getting the idea in your head that if you put in even more effort, she's going to find you more attractive, you need to stop that thought process in its tracks and realize that when a girl truly likes you, the process is much easier than you think, and there's a certain flow to it that feels natural. You won't have to do all this extra stuff to impress her or win her over. And if you do, she doesn't really like you like that to start with. This next one is another counterintuitive point that takes some getting used to, especially if you're a guy that looks up specific things to say to a girl or what lines would be best to use, things like that. And it's another thing that we are conditioned by society to believe because of movies and social media. We see guys say certain things in movies and the girl melts into his arms, or we see highlight clips of a guy saying something slick to a girl in an interaction on social media, and then she gives the guy her number. And this leads to the thought process that if we can just say the right thing, then that will open the doors that we are trying to get through. That will be the missing key that makes everything else easier. We just need to develop a mouthpiece that says all the right things like a James Bond movie, and then we'll finally have good enough game to get an abundance of girls. But in reality, your behavior actually matters more than the specific words that you say. Your behavior is actually the larger attractive signal rather than any specific thing that you say. This is why one guy can say something and fail, and then another guy can say the same thing and succeed. People who falsely believe that everything is based on looks will say that it's because the guy who succeeds is just better looking, but that's not always true. It's more about the underlying behaviors a man exhibits with his communication and the way he carries himself. Because a great looking guy can also come across weak, lame, feminine, creepy, or whatever negative adjective you want to assign to him. It's what leads to the classic complaint from women when they say, well, he was attractive until he opened his mouth. Looks and even clever lines can open the door, but behavior is the true key to everything. So to drive this point home, I want you to picture two different guys approaching the same girl. So guy number one, he just generally has a good vibe about him. He has good relaxed posture. He has good tonality to his voice. He seems comfortable talking, and he's just one of those guys that feels kind of magnetic. Like he just He brings something to the room where he feels like a good time to be around. And he's just one of those guys that you would like to have in your group if you're going to go out with friends. Now, the second guy, he gives off a little bit more of an awkward vibe. You're not really sure why. He's polite, he's nice. He just seems a little bit unsure of himself. He doesn't really hold eye contact, whereas the first guy has really good eye contact when he's talking to you, and he seems like he's really paying attention to what you're saying. But with the second guy, he doesn't hold strong eye contact and he breaks it frequently. The tonality of his voice is also just a little bit shaky, and overall he seems like a nice guy, but he kind of inspires this weird feeling to the people around him that just feels kind of awkward. Now, just off that description alone, without considering the specific things that they're saying to the girl, what guy do you think is going to have success? Obviously, guy number one. And it's these traits that make up your behavior overall, or your aura, or the vibe you're giving off, that matters the most. Of course, what you say does matter to some degree. You can't just go talking like a moron. But the point that I'm driving home here is that when your behavior is dialed in overall, you don't have to be technically perfect or technically flawless. It gives you more slack, and it's also more freeing. And when I say that it's freeing, what I mean by that is you don't have to worry about nailing every single little thing. And it allows you to be more present in the moment and just to be more present in your body rather than living in your head analyzing every little thing that you're doing. And these intangibles, or these traits that feel kind of invisible to you, can make a massive difference. And to give you another example of this, I was talking to a subscriber of the channel, and he was telling me a story about how his work had this event going on where everyone gathered for like a party type of event, and there was this guy across the room that he saw, and he just assumed that this guy was gay because of the way that he carried himself, his body language, his mannerisms. He said that the impression that he got is that this guy was gay. But later on, they got into a conversation, and he realized that his assumption was wrong, and this guy was actually straight. And they got on the subject of dating, and this guy said that he had been struggling with women and didn't know why. So he actually lacked the self-awareness of the vibe that he was giving off through his expressions, his mannerisms, his body language, and all those traits that make up the impression that you make on other people even from afar. So in his mind, he was doing everything right, and it was completely confusing as to why he wasn't seeing success. But from the perspective of someone else, there was multiple things projecting a vibe that he wasn't intending to at all. So in summary, your words do matter to some degree. You can't just ramble on like an idiot and expect great things to happen. But dialing in the traits that make up attractive behavior overall is what matters the most, and it gives you room to not have to be perfect with every little thing that you say or do. If you pass a girl's looks threshold, behavior is the deal breaker that decides where things go, not nailing every single thing you say perfectly. And an interesting thing about behavior is that you're actually at your most attractive when you are in a relaxed, unfiltered state. The less planned and scripted you are, the more attractive you are. And this is what leads to those situations where you aren't even trying and some girl thinks that you're really attractive. And usually that girl will be less attractive than the girls you actually want, because you're operating in an unfiltered, relaxed state around her, because you simply don't care about winning that girl over, but ironically, you're at your most attractive. Then when you're around an attractive girl, the filters start to go up, the thinking process increases around what you should say to her, and this creates a state that isn't your authentic self. You're operating outside of that unfiltered, raw state, and you begin to become more uptight and act in a way that isn't true to yourself, which isn't attractive. But another tip is that if you ever get the chance to ask someone around you to give you feedback on what you acted like when you were around a girl that you were highly attracted to, then do it, because you'll often hear details they noticed that you didn't see in yourself. You'll think you were totally acting normal or on your A game when you really weren't. And more often than not, that leads to a loss of attraction from the girl and wondering what happened on your end. Now, a common question I get all the time is, where do I go to meet all the quality women? And guys will always have varying answers for this. A common one is that, well, you gotta approach in person, man. That's where all the quality girls are. Some guys will even go deeper with this and say that there are specific places you should approach girls, like in libraries or churches, because that's where the good girls hang out. Or that you should avoid meeting girls in bars and clubs because only low quality party girls with high body counts hang out there. But all of this advice is based on the faulty premise that high and low quality women gather in specific places, and you should just have to go to a specific place to find a high quality girl. But if you think about it, if it were that easy, then no one would be asking where do you find the high quality girls in the first place. Everyone would already know that you just go to a specific place or places, find your quality girl, and then just move on with your life. There wouldn't be any dating content, guys wouldn't be struggling, and everything would be great. But obviously that isn't the case, and this question is asked damn near every day, so the idea of high and low quality women being in specific places is obviously wrong. I worked in nightclubs for a bit as a photographer and videographer for EDM DJs, and I can tell you that about a third of the population at a nightclub are people who don't even usually go out to clubs. They might be out for a friend's birthday, or they got dragged there after a breakup, or they came to see a specific artist they like. There's all kinds of reasons. It's the same thing with bars. Some people just go out for a drink with friends, or they want to get out of the house for a change. You can't always automatically assume that everyone in these venues are just low quality party goers. On the opposite side of things, you would expect to find high quality girls in productive, less party oriented places like churches, gyms, coffee shops, or through groups and hobbies. But I have some news for you. All of these places have one thing in common. They all have humans in them, which means it's the same creature no matter where you go. Outside of using some very basic common sense like not looking for a wife in a brothel or trying to date the girl who's at the club every single weekend, there is no reliable way to just magically find a high quality girl who won't be a bad investment later on. There's a saying that you can find an angel in hell and a demon in heaven, and it's definitely true here. A friend of mine met a girl through our gym who never went out and partied, was focused on school and sports, was quiet in the gym and minded her own business, yet she turned out to be one of the weirdest girls either one of us has ever dealt with. She had some wild, deep-rooted psychological issues. And a client of mine was married to a successful woman with a low body count he met through college, and he ended up divorcing her years later because their marriage was completely dead and platonic. And some of the longest couples I currently know met in random ways like through a house party or a dating app, both of those being sources that most men would label as only having low quality options, so to speak. Outside of avoiding obviously stupid scenarios, finding a quality person is largely a game of randomness that has little correlation to environment and is more of a process based on math and variance, which is why I recommend getting exposure to as many women as possible and filtering down from there. But the chances of you going to a specific source and finding your dream girl just because someone said quality women supposedly hang out there is very low. It's not entirely impossible, but logically speaking, it is very low due to all the complexities that make up human beings and the other factors like the timing of being in a certain place at a certain time to meet someone. And I referenced dating apps before, and that is another source that gets labeled as low quality by a lot of guys online. But again, it's the same as any other source. And I've actually noticed a lot of times you'll find girls on there that are less party oriented and more focused on other productive things in their life. And that's why they're using a dating app in the first place to try and meet someone. Some of those girls just don't go out enough to get exposure to guys on a regular basis, so they figure they'll have to try online methods. And I met an attractive girl recently who is a doctor, and we were talking about ways that people meet, and she actually asked me, do people actually meet anywhere other than Hinge these days? All my friends are dating guys from Hinge. And that was her quote word for word. So does that mean that Hinge and dating apps are the absolute best way to find high quality girls? No, but it does mean that those girls are in the mix just like anywhere else. So as a man, it's best for you to have that part of your game covered too, so that you can have options from that source as well. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage by cutting off a massive source of women. The same way you can approach a girl on the street and meet a complete nutcase or a quality girl is the same way you can match with a girl in a dating app and have the same chance at either outcome. One caveat I will mention for dating apps is that the hottest and highest quality women I've met on there all had one thing in common, and so did this girl I talked to recently, and that was the fact that they were on there for a short period of time, they got bombarded by weirdos sending them bizarre and thirsty messages, and then they were off the app after a couple of weeks. So contrary to popular belief on the internet, not every girl loves soaking up attention from a bunch of guys that they don't even like anyway. And you can catch some quality girls on dating apps and Instagram if you're on there with an attractive profile and you're active. But just like any other source, you'll never actually catch these high quality options unless you have exposure to a variety of women on a regular basis, and that's where most guys go wrong. So if you want to solve that exposure problem with my help and work with me directly to dial in your dating life to get in the mix with attractive women consistently and use my systems that I've created to do so in the most efficient and effective way possible, then be sure to click the link in the description. And with that said, I will see you in the next one.